mentioned, I'm the parks manager here, and thanks for the opportunity to say a few words about the Oak Bay Cool Kit. As many of you know, the Oak Bay Cool Kit is a partnership between the District of Oak Bay, UBC, specifically the Collaborative Advanced Landscape Planning, and the District of Oak Bay, the residents. And really, it's a free do-it-yourself visual guide that helps neighbors take climate action right on their own block. And the idea is really simple, and it's to empower residents to create local climate action plans that focus both on reducing emissions and adapting to the changes we're already experiencing, and all while supporting the district's own goals. And those goals really are, and their own goals are really ambitious. Oak Bay is aiming for a 40% canopy cover by 2045, and the CRD has a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Big targets. Some would say aggressively optimistic, really. But we need the community involvement to get there. And that's why we're hosting another Cool Kit event. It's coming up on Friday, the 27th at 7 p.m. at Windsor Pavilion. You're all invited, and the title is Scaling Up Community Action. And I'll just be sharing a refresher with everybody over the last 3 years of what we've achieved. Megan Woods, who is the district's climate planner, will be speaking about how you can get more involved locally. And Dr. Stephen Shepard, who is really the brainchild behind the Cool Kit and was a professor at UBC, now retired and an Oak Bay resident, will be speaking about neighborhood climate champions and practical solutions for homes and communities. And then we're going to open it up for discussion, for a roundtable to share the successes we've had so far, all the lessons that we've learned, and new ideas for the community leadership, and really to sustain the momentum and the action that we've already got going. One of the stories that I do like to tell is that Stephen Shepard and we went to Washington, D.C. to the World Forest Conference in 2023 and presented the Cool Kit. And there were over 1,200 attendees there. There were over 60 countries from around the world. And there were so many inspiring stories to Beijing, Halifax, Oak Bay, just people that were just doing so much in regards to how they build and how they move around cities and green infrastructure. It was just so inspiring. So don't be discouraged with all the climate negativity that you can find online. Wonderful things are being done. But one of the keynote speakers there was a fellow by the name of Ali Zadar, and he was the National Climate Advisor for the Biden-Harris administration. And what he emphasized so loudly and clearly and so many times was it is of great urgency really to reduce emissions and to tackle urban heat. And one of the ways that we can do that is through urban forestry. And Oak Bay is trying to meet those demands, both with our public tree planting and also through our free tree program that originated out of the Cool Kit, and that's free trees for private property. And they're quite nice trees, everything from Garry oak to of the whole oak family. So really, really great selection. And since the Cool Kit started, we're around 200 trees that we've got in on private land, which is pretty tremendous. But when you think about it, Victoria is so fortunate in the sense that we have just a phenomenal ocean that really regulates our climate so well. We have tremendous eelgrass beds that don't get the attention that they deserve, that are just quietly absorbing carbon just off our foreshore. And we have a wonderful urban forest here, 33% canopy cover in Oak Bay. And we have a great forest on the West Coast that brings us lots of clean air. But Oak Bay also has some of the most exceptional natural and cultural sites in Greater Victoria. And for example, it's home to 6 of the 11 key biodiversity areas. And a key biodiversity area is an area that is an intact, healthy, and functioning ecosystem. And Uplands Park certainly is one of our best examples of that, which is really the largest remaining fragment of what a Garry Oak and associated ecosystem is on southeastern Vancouver Island. And it provides protection for just an exceptional number of rare and endangered plants, probably more rare and endangered plants in Uplands Park than any park in the country. So that's a pretty amazing achievement, I think, and it's something to be really, really proud of. And in saying all of that, in regards to trees and natural systems, one of the great trees that really stands up to drought and climate change is Garry Oak. Garry Oak is about 33% of the trees that we plant. And that tree and its associated ecosystem are well suited, but we're beginning to see changes and things that that we're concerned about in the climate there too. So really, there's a lot to consider. So with the toolkit in itself, what we ask residents to do is to begin to kind of look at how they live, look how their block operates, ask yourself questions of can I reduce my driving? How do I eat my food? What type of windows do I have in my house? And then look at your landscape and begin to ask questions that are really important in regards to how many native plants have I put into my yard to bring nature back into the city? Am I looking after my rainwater so the water table recharges? And how can I move with my house and my landscape all the way down to net zero? So these are all the things that we're going to be talking about coming up on the 25th down at Windsor Pavilion. So I encourage you to come along, listen, bring a friend, bring your ideas, bring your energy, and it would be really good to see you. So there's a poster right there, along with some other thing that Margaret Lakey, one of our great champions in Uplands Park, right there, Margaret, has brought along. So have a look at her storyboard there and enjoy the presentation. And I really appreciate you giving me the time. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Just making sure that everybody can see things properly. Thanks very much, Chris. Really appreciate that. And also the introduction earlier as well, too. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight, both in person and online. My name is Carollyne Yardley, and I'm a director of the Garry Oak Meadow Preservation Society. Our acronym is GOMPS, a registered charity founded in 1992 and entirely volunteer run. This evening, I'll be sharing the Victoria Community Association Network Garry Oak Community Mapping Project. And then briefly, I'm going to talk about how James Bay neighborhood carried that work forward through an initiative at Holland Point Park. This evening, I'm going to change my slide now. VCAN brings together representatives from all 12 neighborhood associations in the city of Victoria to support projects with citywide impact. This project was made possible by the City of Victoria My Great Neighborhood Resilience Grant, neighbor volunteers, a GIS consultant, and support from GOMPS, the Sierra Club of BC, and the Rockland Neighborhood Association who administered the grant. We had a wrap-up event at the City of Victoria's Neighbor Space on Douglas Street, and the final report was submitted to the City of Victoria and emailed to the Songhees Nation for their files. The Google map and report is published and available for viewing and download, and I will share the link with you at the end of this presentation. I am active in Garry Oak conservation, mapping, and land use policy through several community organizations. My affection for the Garry Oak ecosystem is deeply rooted. I have lived on Lekwungen territory for a lifetime, and I consider myself an islander. Growing up in Oak Bay gave me a strong connection to this place. and to the species that share it, some of which, like the western bluebird, disappeared from this region in 1995. And I didn't realize that until much later, that a bird that I'd grown up with was no longer part of my everyday world. Efforts such as the Cowichan Bring Back the Bluebirds project remind me that restitution and ecological recovery are possible, as is being a better guest on land. Many of you live, work, or own property in and around the city of Victoria, where the VCAN mapping project took place. Our municipalities are ecologically connected, and this project grew out of a shared desire to better understand and care for the ecosystems that link us across the CRD, and perhaps one day even bring the bluebirds back to Oak Bay through collective effort. The VCAN mapping project took place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as the Songhees and the Kosapsan nations. Both VCAN community mapping and the GOMPS LiDAR mapping project, which will be presented by Ryan Senechal later this evening, acknowledge that colonial maps have historically erased Indigenous cultures and territories. Maps based on colonial records, as well as current mapping projects in the Metro Victoria area, are not completely accurate if they don't provide Indigenous input and if they fail to acknowledge the impacts of environmental colonialism on Indigenous land. Both VCAN and GOMPS will work to learn more about these ongoing impacts and encourage neighborhoods to make room for native plants and trees as a tangible act of connecting with the territory. The VCAN mapping project began as a conservation about the distribution of biodiversity within and between the City of Victoria's neighborhoods. The project occurred between March 2024 and 2025. We received $7,500 for supplies and a GIS consultant. 33 team members recorded 950 volunteer hours. To complement the city's excellent inventory of all trees on public land, 12 neighborhoods, including Burnside Gorge, Vic West, Fairfield Gonzales, Oaklands, Rockland, North Jubilee, South Jubilee, Fernwood, James Bay, North Park, Downtown, and Hillside Quadra, began an inventory of Garry oaks and other elements of the ecosystem on private property. Each neighborhood was asked to identify 3 potential areas for future conservation or nature park development. As some of you may know, there is no more park space in the city of Victoria. Each neighborhood developed its own approach and reported back to their neighborhood associations on what they learned about the larger patterns within the urban forest. Before European settlement, most of what is now the City of Victoria area supported Garry Oak ecosystems. The ecosystem known as the Kwetla food system in Lekwungen language is located within the coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone. In Canada, its range is limited to southeastern Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, with only 2 small isolated groves east of Vancouver. The northerly population extends as far as Campbell River. Human pressure from development, agriculture, and logging make it the most endangered ecosystem in Canada, with only 5% remaining in a natural state. The Garry oak tree, the keystone species, emerged after the last ice age 8,000 years ago, and it supports at least 1,645 co-evolved species of plants, insects, mammals, and amphibians, birds, and reptiles, making its preservation crucial. The trees and associated ecosystems in this region have a local genetic adaptation to the environment, and it would be very difficult and costly to introduce if lost. 25% of relatively intact Garry oak ecosystems occur in places like regional parks, but up to 75% of Garry oak trees and modified ecosystems are located in what the City of Victoria refers to as private land. Trees exist on private properties in Victoria that exceed 250 years old, the marker which meets the definition of old growth for coastal forests by the province of BC, and many of those old trees continue to thrive, vibrating with the rich cultural history of Lekwungen territory. The one in this photo at the very, very closest to us is 500 years old. Garry oak ecosystems naturally adapted to hot, dry summers, function as important nature-based solutions by helping mitigate the urban heat island effect and supporting stormwater management, particularly in areas where vulnerable people live. The Garry oak ecosystem is a living artifact of Indigenous peoples who agroecologically managed this land for thousands of years, forming the open oak savanna landscape. Without these land management practices, the landscape would become dominated by closed stands of Douglas fir and grand fir. Indigenous-led work, including research and restoration, is underway to reinstate harvesting in the meadows for food and medicines, as well as reintroducing associated plant species. Cheryl Bryce, knowledge holder, Songhees Nation says, the Garry Oak ecosystem is a living artifact of my ancestors. The Glokungan people will continue to harvest and pick potwell for many years to come. Its importance is vital to our history, traditions, and future roles and responsibilities. There is still so much work to do in regards to reinstating potwell food systems and cultural roles. So why community mapping? Garry Oak specific mapping, which you'll hear about later, has not been updated since the reduction of Ted Lee's 2006 publication of Historical Garry Oak Ecosystems on Vancouver Island. The scale of recent land use changes has increased concerns for urban forest and tree health, and the role of public participation in successful urban forest governance. New housing legislation has accentuated the need to foreground how smaller fragments of urban green space can be thought about as locations of conservation for the Garry Oak Forest to facilitate distribution of ecosystem services, scaffold urban forest connectivity, and empower opportunities. The VCAN mapping project was fundamentally, though, a community resilience initiative, bringing together 12 distinct neighborhoods through a shared ecosystem. Neighborhood representatives collaborated to closely share mapping methods, knowledge, and strategies to support one another. Presentations brought us to conversations about cultural spaces, trees from pre-settlement managed lands, and how ecological and social ecologies intersect. It helped us ask, how do we connect people to this place rather than just through conservation and biodiversity? We had mapping objectives that I'll list here, but we really wanted to enhance awareness of cultural connections to the territory and impacts of settlement, foster connections between the residents and urban natural environment, develop a more complete map of Garry Oaks and biodiversity elements, and identify wildlife corridors for organism movement between these complex ecosystems. We aimed to inform urban development, park acquisition, and canopy equity initiatives. Highlights of the project included a speaker series and learning events, both on Zoom and in person, including Patricia Diak, Natural Asset Management, and Anne-Marie Daniels of What's the Rush Mapping, development of an interactive web map that was accessible and editable, or is, by community members, creation of tutorials for mapping significant areas, organization and conversion of that data for analytical purposes, and preliminary habitat analysis for statistical assessment. We also initiated a letter for discussions with builders and developers to address land use changes impacting the Garry Oak ecosystem and ways they can assist. As we were beginning our first field event, this quote came to us through actually the person who led this tour, Dave Clark. And it was Eric Higgs from the School of Environmental Studies at UVic in 2002 from the Garry Oak Ecosystem Restoration Team, GORD. Restoring Garry Oak ecosystems is partly an act of imagination, piecing together the places that once were and those that might be. Beyond our conventional relationships with the land, especially in urban areas, is the dream of an integrated landscape, nourished by care, respect, and diligence. Ultimately, restoring Garry Oak habitat is more than protecting an ecological community. It is at least as much about renewing social community, cultural, and in this way, bringing the ecological and the social together. The first event took place on June 5th in the woodlands behind Government House in Rockland. Guided by Dave Clark, he is the environmental chair of the Rockland Neighborhood Association and a retired forester. The group learned to recognize 3 primary Garry Oak ecosystem types: scrubby shallow, deep meadow soil, and ocean spray, and discussed how each supports different ecological functions. This helped participants identify what to look for in their own neighborhoods, including mature trees, remnant meadows, but also potential sites for regeneration. These observations helped shape our mapping process, and then Dave shared his knowledge of data sets owned by the City of Victoria and that are made available through VicMaps, the city's mapping server. Volunteers received training and visual identification of Garry Oak trees, whose distinctive characteristics make relevant scientists to recognize. Because neighborhood volunteers were able to observe and document them from the street without entering private property. Our mapping approach was informed by traditional GIS, Geographic Information System methodologies, while also prioritizing accessibility and adaptability for community members. This sample, produced using a professional grade software, illustrates the type of baseline framework we aimed to establish. For example, this maps habitat fragments and ecological corridors using existing CRD data on ecosystem extents from 1800 and 1997, alongside the City of Victoria's records of individual Garry oak trees.
Losing you.
Supported community engagement and also, of course, consideration of budget limitation. Project centered then on developing an interactive Google map designed to be editable and accessible by community members without specialized GIS training. We organized the map by neighborhood, and we imported the GIS layers from the City of Victoria's Vic maps. The layers we imported were the individual Garry oak trees on public land. We imported the layer of parks and open spaces, greenways, and sensitive ecosystems to establish the baseline. So these green trees that you see, those are all Garry oak trees on public property. These layers helped us illustrate how city-owned trees and private properties connect to key ecological spaces such as Topaz Park, Beacon Hill, Summit, Gonzales, Moss Rock, providing insight into these potential corridors for plant and animal movement. GIS, let's see if I can get this to, there we go. Landon Matechuk of Cedar Shore Consulting developed both video and written tutorials for us to guide volunteers through the mapping process. He also led Zoom session demonstrating how participants could contribute directly by adding points for individual Garry oak trees and drawing polygons to represent meadows, ecosystem fragments, or ecological corridors. We can also add photographs, as you can see there as well too. Each neighborhood was invited to identify up to 3 priority sites with existing or potential for mature trees. However, the process was really varied according to conditions. As you can imagine, downtown has far fewer Garry oaks than Oaklands. This flexible approach kept the emphasis more on participation and learning rather than technical precision, while still generating data that could support further analysis. The next event was a walking event guided by Ryan Senechal, whom you'll hear speak following this presentation. The tour was at Kings Park in Fernwood, and it helped ground the mapping in a living example. This park contains Garry oaks that predate settlement, including trees estimated to be between 275 and 500 years old. These trees likely developed under Indigenous fire stewardship and remain culturally and ecologically significant today. The land was donated to the City of Victoria as park space through an estate. The original house was removed, and additional Garry oak seedlings have since been planted. This restoration has helped offset increasing density near Royal Athletic Park and the loss of plantable space in the surrounding area. We also discussed how these spaces provide Indigenous youth with a direct connection to their ancestors and support the continuation and transmission of knowledge as traditions evolve. This visit raised practical questions as well too, though, about public safety, branch failure, and governance, but ultimately it reinforced that meaningful stewardship requires collective participation. One of the most valuable outcomes of the mapping tutorial was learning how to translate on that shows the Rockland neighborhood. The green markers indicate again Garry oaks on public property, such as boulevard trees, while the orange markers represent areas with high probability of Garry oaks. These locations were later verified through on-the-ground observations while volunteers cycled through the streets to confirm and record the actual count of trees visible from the public right-of-way. It quickly also became clear in the project that many of the teams found it difficult to begin the process without printed analog maps. Using the online Google Map screen captures of individual parcels were then assembled in Photoshop to create large JPEG images of each neighborhood. These files were then sent to a place called the Print Lab for large format printing and then distributed to each neighborhood representative. Representative used the printed maps in a playful tactile process, marking locations, recording observations, which were later transferred to the online map. These analog maps not require a Google account or an internet access, reducing those barriers to participation and supporting in-person collaboration and neighborhood orientation. They also introduced an unexpected creative dimension with teams using stickers. We had kid stickers on many of them, annotations and diagrams to share their insights. And after the wrap-up event, the maps were returned to each neighborhood to support future community planning discussions. These were all about 44 inches wide. Some groups even suggested using a reusable Mylar layer overlay so that they could add additional features like waterways or elevation over time. In addition to Google Maps, the project was supported by an additional tool developed by a community member. This was a wonderful surprise. Ken Wong from Hillside Quadra, also known as the Summit Park team, created and shared a clear step-by-step tutorial using the free Organic Maps mobile app. This tool enabled participants to map in the field, including offline, and to import and export data for use alongside other mapping platforms. The app also allows for collection or estimation of additional information about individual trees, such as the diameter at breast height and overall vigor. It can also be used to document other neighborhood species like arbutus and Douglas and big leaf maple and whatnot. And I've heard of future initiatives of using this for a heritage tree walking tour. It just showed how knowledge sharing within the network really strengthened the overall project, and a link to Ken's Organic Maps manual will also be shared at the end of the presentation. And I just want to show you here, this is a screen capture from the GOMPS website. So the map is there and you can zoom in and out. It's interactive and you can move around. I haven't actually showed it to you, so there it is. And we also had some preliminary statistical analysis. So once the community mapping data was compiled, we worked with a GIS consultant to conduct a preliminary statistical analysis of the information gathered by the teams. And the data was organized into community mapping layers, or .kmz files, which can be integrated into QGIS, which is free desktop software for further analysis. The analysis examined environmental characteristics at mapped oak tree locations, including slope distribution, habitat conditions, median parcel size. Additional studies could explore correlations with development patterns, such as areas with buildings with 4 stories or higher, to better understand factors influencing seed distribution, as well as patterns related to sun and wind exposure. Overall, this process demonstrated that community-generated data can be structured to support meaningful spatial and stewardship initiatives. One of the tools that emerged from the VCAM project is called the Dear Developer Letter. It's a simple, plain language template designed to open dialogue early, before plans are finalized or positions become polarized. Rather than taking an oppositional stance or asking developers to stop building, the letter invites them to recognize existing Garry oak trees, ecosystem fragments, and opportunities for ecological connectivity on or near their sites, and to consider how these elements might be protected, integrated, or enhanced through thoughtful design. At its core, the letter encourages place-based collaboration. The wrap-up event was held on November 16th, 2025 at Neighbor Space on Douglas Street. Gathering brought the full project together, with neighborhoods sharing their digital data invitations through associations, social media, but here was a chance to display the large format maps at the venue, and each neighborhood was invited to speak for 5 minutes and present, outlining its mapping approach and identifying their 3 priority areas for potential conservation and future nature park development. What emerged was a diversity of approaches. There was no single method. Each neighborhood adapted the process to reflect its unique context, priorities, and landscape. Before closing and showing you the link in the website where you can acquire all of these documents, I wanted to show you a final slide that links to the project, but it's not part of the project. These are 2 outcomes that emerged after the VCAN one, both inspired by the team that formed in James Bay through the mapping process. Jacqueline Jolicoeur, a VCAN mapping team member for James Bay, connected with the BC Key Biodiversity Coordinator, who advised that Holland Point Park at Dallas and adjacent areas has been proposed as a key biodiversity area, which we are allowed to say. Community observations will help support and confirm this designation. So Jacqueline, who's also a retired forester, has formed the Team iNaturalist James Bay group, and she's going to coach the James Bay group on using iNaturalist in February and a broader group of residents later, and encouraged participation in recording later in the spring. The species currently meeting the key biodiversity area criteria for the site include the night-stalking tiger beetle, the dense flowered lupine, and the purple Senechal. One other project that I'll highlight before finishing off here is one led by Catherine Pankowski. She's the gardening and recycling coordinator with the James Bay Neighborhood Association, and they had some really interesting actions afterward for boulevard and tree pit restoration at Croft and Simcoe, with installation planned for the spring, approval of a butterfly support garden at Rithett and South Turner on newly depaved site, and replacement of non-native plantings with native species in the adjacent condominium building. So those are some really nice outcomes, seeing how people who didn't know each other came together through one project, and now they've really continued on with something that's quite special. And here we go. All of the documents and the project is available at the Garry Oak Preservation Society website, which I think has been knocked out there because of the recording that nobody dares to touch while we're live. And but the garryoak.info website is there, and you can navigate to advocate projects, and you will find all of the links there and the live report and documents that you can download. So thank you very much. And for your interest today. And Ryan Senechal is now going to probably expand on the topic of Garry Oak mapping with a very exciting presentation on LiDAR mapping. So I will pass the computer of some sort over to him. Thank you very much. I've left mine on talking, so I'll pull this out.
Yeah, switch up. Yeah, I'll switch computers. If you want to, you can be the host.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you do it. Turn my on mute as well.
Please.
To mute.
Testing 1, 2. Oh, that sounds like a good check. Okay, now the hard part. Shoot, don't do that. From the beginning. Okay, thank you very much, Carolyn. That's wonderful. I kind of changed gears on what I had originally proposed, based on, I guess, recent events, but also just we're heading into an election year. A lot of what I do is right at the interface of trees and people, especially urban trees. And I like talking about urban forest governance, and I'm as I get into a little bit of my background, I can help you understand sort of how I'm approaching this. Thinking locally, but recognizing uphill in governance, in higher orders of government, how things are shaking out right now for management of the urban forest. I felt there was an opportunity to share some perspectives based on this, and I was really encouraged by things that you said, Chris, and there's some continuity. I heard words like collaboration and participation and empowerment. And that ties in well with my presentation as well. I think that's the overall message, and good news, we have a community group here. We have representatives from the academic world, from private sector, from consulting, from municipal management. And I think, skipping right to the end of my presentation, that's more or less what I'm advocating for, is more of a collaborative approach to the management of the urban forest. A bit more about myself. I am, I guess you could say, freelance. I like a mixed bag. I presently work half-time for UBC as a sessional lecturer, and I also do a lot of work with Tree Canada and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as a peer reviewer for their grant streams for the urban forest, both for planting and for plans and studies around urban forest management. I work with the International Society of Arboriculture, which is an organization that advocates for arboriculture and urban forestry best practices, and also credentials professionals in that space. And that's the work I do, is around curriculum and credentials. And as mentioned, I'm with Garry Oak Meadow Preservation Society, and I assist both on the advocacy fronts and at the nursery. And recently joined the board of Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. So I'm very involved in Garry Oaks locally. And my origins are as an arborist, tree climbing and active in the management of urban trees, hands-on, and gradually took an interest in the bigger picture, but I still get to plant trees. I was in an oak doing an aerial inspection about a week ago. So get to see it from several different sides. The topics I'm going to investigate in this presentation of governance are looking at some of the urban forest data, looking at urban forest planning, and talk about opportunities at the end, tying in the overall theme of more of a collaborative model or a participatory model. And I think Oak Bay is pretty far ahead in that work with Dr. Stephen Shepard from UBC through the Cool Kit, and giving a conduit for the public to actually participate and be involved. So we're gonna introduce some frameworks here, talking about governance. We're gonna get a little bit technical, and I'm gonna break down how I think of governance, and using this framework in particular, looking at the actors, the rules of the game, the resources, and the discourses. It will change the way you think about the big problems in urban forest management, perhaps, and how you approach the big problems we're facing with greater effect, greater influence overall. The present urban forest governance approach adopted across the CRD at the municipal level is top-down. It's governance by government, and it is very much affected by what happens further upstream. So the overall temperature around climate-related spending is facing a lot of pressure at the moment due to competing policy priorities, big geopolitical ones. Huge public service cuts, cutting the carbon tax at the Mark Carney level. Now also we've noticed a critical shortage on the housing front, and that's the language we're hearing is urgency, urgency, urgency. So investing all of this energy in deregulating in a way the protections that were present for urban trees and urban forests, and prioritizing housing, and that is happening upstream. That's happening at the federal government, the provincial government, and we're actually seeing additional limits on tree protection bylaws imposed by the provincial government. So as a result, tough decisions need to be made at the local government, and that's very much what we're dealing with. And who holds ownership over the public urban forest is local governments. And the ability to regulate the amount of urban forest assets on private lands are gained or lost is also regulated by local governments. But now we have this influence from the provincial government level that actually restricts the ability to provide physical protection for trees on private lands where allowable density via the changes that have happened through the provincial government's legislation for housing target orders are imposed on us. And so this is the model we're facing at this point. And also within the top-down governance, there are challenges around the 4-year election cycle. And we are in an election year, and there's a lot of chatter, if you haven't already noticed, in the newspapers almost on a daily basis. There's discussion happening around urban forest policy at the local government level. So we expect that there's going to be a fair bit of influence in the campaign, and we've been existing in a policy landscape where housing rules and urban forest is getting less and less presence with the current elected officials in most of the larger municipalities in this area. And in effect, I just came from Vancouver this morning. I was over teaching. I do live in Senechal, by the way, but I was over and back today, and very similar issues across Metro Vancouver region, Fraser Valley, the interior, and we can work our way east across the country. Housing is driving it has firmly the wheel on policy in most local governments in Canada at this point. So to further explain and break down the actors within the framework that I'm sharing, the urban forest governance framework, just imagining all of these people have some role to play in management or stewardship of the urban forest. Indigenous governments, federal governments, like just working our way on down. There's been some policy shifts that have happened at UBCM, which is the Union of BC Municipalities. Oh, turn up my volume. I don't want to do that. Can they not hear me online?
Someone said, can you adjust the microphone or volume for
Oh, it's because I'm probably like
okay.
changing directions. Yeah, normally I don't like being tethered like this, so I'll try to be. So yeah, I apologize. I'm gonna look more at the screen. I'll try and intentionally speak into the microphone. So just recently, FCM and UBCM are both major funders of urban forest initiatives. UBCM has been funding fuel management around wildfire, particularly at the urban wildland interface, and their grant stream has just run out of funding. So you can see how that has a ripple effect on how we manage potential hazards. Not so much right here in Oak Bay, but other areas. Well, look who's here. I was just mentioning you. Nice to see you. So that changes the game for us very quickly when we're dealing, especially in more of the suburban communities, and that's going to more and more become an issue in highlands and parts of Saanich and central Saanich. Thinking about how community groups, community organizations, and nonprofits influence the urban forest, a lot of the changes that have happened that have been enacted, tree protection bylaws, it didn't come from thin air. It came from direct influence from community members standing up, speaking with their elected officials, and making the case for tree protection. So that's an important one to reflect on and remember. More recently, we're seeing a lot of influence from the development community, right? There's a lot of pressure that they seem to wield, and we're in a bit of a power vacuum as a result of it, where we're advocating for sensible and sensitive urban forest stewardship through urban development. So those are just some of the actors, and within each of these groups, I can obviously break things down. Like we go to local government, we can have like the planning side of things, the bylaw side of things, the elected group, the operations staff, tree planting groups, tree climbing, like on and on. So thinking big picture, all of these pieces of the puzzle that participate in the urban forest in some way. And there's power differences across each group and within each group. Some of the resources that are in play, this is, residents, we may have some political influence, we may have some property. Municipal staff is where we see the expertise, potentially operational funding, access to grants. Elected officials are the ones making the decisions. Now, researchers, research outreach capacity. The Cool Kit's a perfect example where we have a framework and a model and a tool where we can actually implement community involvement and hand over that package to municipality so that they understand it. It's nice and clear and coherent for people to participate in. So those are all opportunities that are present, and we could break down this list a whole lot more. The rules right now, if you consider the policy environment now, we have the BC housing target orders, and that's a big one. It is a quota. There are fairly rigid expectations. If those target orders are not met, you'll have an advisor assigned to your municipality, and then we're starting to see direct involvement of the provincial government to force the issue. Now, the BC Community Charter actually restricts what a tree protection bylaw can do. When I mentioned before, you cannot provide physical protection to a tree, even though it exists in the tree protection bylaw, where the building footprint that is allowed with the new zoning that has been put in place via the provincial government regulations. So there can be an exchange of money for the loss of that tree, but the municipality cannot plant trees to offset those lost trees directly, proportionally, on private lands. They don't have access beyond, you know, what they can attain through that development. And again, you can't add planting space within the building footprint that's allowed. So it's this double whammy. Now also, to offset that canopy is very expensive on city lands, and we can't necessarily start stuffing parks to offset that. So we collect some money, but we have the difficult dilemma of opening up a new planting space to get trees to offset the losses on private lands. So there's this ripple effect as a result of this upstream legislation, as I think most of us in the room can appreciate and have had direct experience with by at this point. So other policy objectives are really a strain at this point, based on all hands on deck being directed towards this housing push. We're seeing loss of profile, loss of attention, loss of funding for urban forest initiatives. And as we keep hearing around the urgency around climate change adaptation and mitigation, we need to act quickly, consistently, continue to build up our resilience. So every year we delay is making us more vulnerable overall. The discourses, what is the discourse right now? Like I look at this list on the right-hand side and think of how much the discourse has changed around urban forests in the last 10 years and the last 5 years. Everything is constantly jockeying for position here. Housing has been up near the top since probably 2018, 2019. Transportation is very big in the region. Cost of living is very high, and we're no longer hearing much about reconciliation, much about biodiversity, much about climate change. In fact, we're seeing climate change action being gutted at multiple orders of government to redirect energies elsewhere to higher priority policy issues, largely around the geopolitics, the effects of the United States and its administration's actions on that are directly impacting Canadian lives. So where's urban forestry and ecology sit within the discourse? Not very high at this point in time, and you can choose your order of government. That's unfortunately the situation at this point. So the breaking news today here, Trump has removed, via the EPA, removed the power to fight climate change. Very targeted administrative move. It's also, I saw today, they're directing coal production to feed into the energy system. And simultaneously, we have the Mark Carney government scrapping urban forest grant streams that are intended to build our resilience to adapt to climate change. And this one, which I had mentioned, this is the Union of BC Municipalities. Their Fire Smart fuel management budget is out. And this was driving a lot of the fuel management in communities that exist at the wildland urban interface in BC. And we have just recently seen some pushback from local governments. Mayors have started to push back on the housing target orders and Bill 44 specifically. But so far that hasn't really moved the policy push, I would say. And then the service cuts is having a huge effect, and it's specifically targeting people working in environment and science jobs. So it kind of feels like a perfect storm. I'm gonna get the critical stuff out of the way. Don't worry, there's a happy ending. Bear with me. So urban forest strategy has been a real dominant narrative, I think, in the overall discourse around urban forest management. We've seen a huge groundswell of urban forest strategies developed in communities that hadn't previously had them in the last 4 years. And then a lot of them that were early adopters have been updating. There's just been a huge push towards urban forest strategy. What is it? It's a desired future state put into a document that council can enact. And hopefully they will. It contains a vision, goals, objectives, and actions. It does, in effect, pulls together a baseline. Understand your present state. You have to understand what you have before you can project out like canopy targets, for example. And in cases like District of Senechal, they have an earlier baseline that now we can do a comparison with. So you incorporate a comparative analysis. How are we doing? And how does that shape, in effect, our desired distant state? It will incorporate, hopefully, community perspectives. It'll look at operational gaps. It'll look, interdepartmentally, where's the strain? Talking about future risks and mitigation. Big one, just leaving Vancouver, is the western hemlock looper moth that created a pretty serious situation in Stanley Park, a very costly one. What future risks are there for us in the management of the trees locally? And then finally, it's producing prioritized actions that can be implemented with, hopefully a funding assignment. And lastly, there's a time frame associated with it. So our targets are for 2030 or for 2064, what have you. Presently in urban forest planning, and I had mentioned the community's overall involvement in persuading changes in how the urban forest is managed, how a lot of our wins have come directly from people sort of showing up for the trees, showing up for the urban forest, making strong persuasive cases for the care of those trees. Presently, this is the driver, the community values, and we could jump over to staff, but staff has limits on what they can enact. Typically, the route is council, mayor and council, letter writing, meeting for coffee, community organizations inviting those officials in, sharing with them, providing a validation of the community's perspective on this being important to them. And then that could happen at the campaign, and there's a campaign coming, so gear up, everybody. And then hopefully we get some candidates that show up for the urban forest as we head into the local elections. Hopefully we start to get some of those community values in provincial government. And there has been a case of that in the past. Laurel Collins was a big supporter of a major budget increase to City of Victoria back in 2018, and it has gone on to the provincial level and brings that knowledge in from direct input and influence from the community. So from council, we take it to staff, and then we pass that on to managers of urban forest departments. And is there something we can do with that, or does it get passed on to consultants, and then so on? There's going to be an analysis and an engagement stage where, if we're looking at an urban forest strategy, there's direct connection with the community. How do people interact with this? And then this is the goal, adopting the plan. And that seems to be where we really start to fall down, is at the adoption stage. I thought there was some reaction to my saying that there, but oh, tense. So we get to the adoption stage and we struggle to go from adoption to implementation. So it's formally recognized as council receives the finished document and like, here we go, we've got our plan. But we need to implement the plan, and usually that costs money. And there's a lot of competition for tax dollars, as we know. And a lot of the targets that are built into these documents, these urban forest strategies that are, have a time frame of 30 years, are dependent on implementation. This is where the community really needs to apply the pressure to get it over the finish line so we can get those next implementation goals funded, resourced, and integrated into the local government. There's going to be a review period at some point, and then we're back to the beginning, community values. Now, unfortunately, where policy objectives are right now, and everything is geared towards housing, it is deprioritized urban forestry, and we're no longer really able to get the attention of council. And with the removal of public hearing from certain forms of building permit applications, it removes another opportunity for the community to participate in that process. It's just all these factors sort of stack up, and we start to lose our overall ability to influence the ecosystem of governance. Now, the situation, you see this crude chart I've thrown together, just using the example of the investment that went into City of Victoria's operations in about 2018, we saw this spike, big boost in the spending, and then we're just flatline for a long period afterwards. And that's where I'm curious how we can have a more continuous growth pattern. And we're unfortunately tied to candidates that are here for a good time and not a long time potentially, and that was the case with Laurel Collins. So we lost our champion on council, and it has sort of petered along. The overall cost of service delivery continues to go up. It has never cost more to plant a tree in an urban space than it does today. It's getting harder to get trees through the establishment process. So in effect, you're working with the same budget and facing all these cost pressures just to hit the quotas that you've already committed to. But that's not what we want. We want growth. We want to have growth. We want to see these departments continuing to grow in staff and tools and have the budget to do it, to plant trees that are going to be long-lived, well cared for. So it's kind of a perfect storm. Is this working? I've got several criteria to suggest why it might not be. Spoiler. So urban forest bylaw was a key structure for a while. It's been undermined in some ways that make it really difficult for us to hold our ground. And particularly with existing trees, larger mature trees that give us the greatest benefits overall, and the type of benefits that spill out beyond the property that actually create this connective canopy and all the ecosystem services that especially show up in higher heat. We need that connectivity and canopy for biodiversity, for evaporation and cooling the ambient air, and also slowing rainwater when the trees are still in leaf in that case. So we have off-property trees, for example, that are affected by the building envelope, and difficult choices need to be made about trees that aren't even present within the building envelope. This is the perfect storm we find ourselves with. So it's easier to remove and replace, but we don't have a lot of space to replace. And we certainly can't replace the canopy lost from that existing tree. Urban forest as a policy priority is low. I've shared that in conversations at multiple orders of government. The message is the voters, this isn't high on their list like the other things. Like they need housing, they want housing. As a result of the overall temperature of investment and spending within governments, most local governments are in a hiring freeze around urban forestry and arboriculture. They, in some cases, are reducing full-time employment positions, removing those positions from their operations, and staff are they're overcommitted already on what they're already supposed to be doing. So asking for growth out of these programs is putting more of a burden on their backs. They need support, and they need it quickly if we're going to grow, especially as these challenges get more and more difficult to overcome. We're seeing clawbacks of cash in lieu. The funds that come from development are going into general coffers. They're not even feeding back into planting efforts. And in several cases, I was just with an arborist with City of Vancouver this morning, and they said they have rolled back their planting commitments for 2026, which is not what you want to hear. I mentioned the cost of planting and establishment are going up. Plantable space is decreasing. Growing conditions are increasingly difficult. We're seeing more trees lost on private lands. There's an increased dependence on grants, but grants, as we see, are now vulnerable. The 2 billion trees being slashed is one example. And we don't have access to life cycle maintenance funding. I was just having a conversation with the arborists with the school district. They're saying we have parent advisory committees that want to plant trees. They're going to fund the trees, but we can't afford to maintain them. We don't have the capacity to water them through establishment. Additionally, information sharing and trust between local governments and community is trending downward. Funding is being funneled to consultants, and the overall influence from these plans we're seeing doesn't seem to be taking root, doesn't seem to be having the effect. To use the example in Senech, they enthusiastically adopted their urban forest strategy, and then in the very next budget cycle, they did not apply any additional funds to the urban forest. So that's the heavy stuff out of the way. Everybody can just like. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about mapping now and urban forest data specifically. And I keep returning to Peter Dunker's comment. No one data set is an adequate representation of a complex urban forest. No one data set. And my other favorite is Dr. Paul Pickel from UBC Forestry's All Maps Are Lies. I love maps, but you can see how maps skew the narrative and can be used nefariously. This was this morning. Does anybody know where I am? Stephen, do you know where I am? Yeah. So, does anybody know who this is? That's, you'll have to come up close and see.
Is this Chinatown?
It's right beside Chinatown, downtown east side, correct. So this specific neighborhood is Hogan's Alley. Has anybody heard the story of Hogan's Alley?
What city is it in?
Vancouver. Yeah. Yeah, so this is one of the classes I teach. This is the Masters of Urban Forestry Leadership. This is our group from this morning. It's Black History Month. Hogan's Alley is a Black community that was displaced via city planning and city infrastructure building, where the language of blight and slum and crime was used to advance an agenda that fragmented the community and removed the community and replaced houses and a vibrant community hub, a church, with a viaduct. So we were there talking about it. This is a shrine to Jimi Hendrix. Jimmy's grandmother, Nora, was a mainstay of the community, very active in forming the Fountain Chapel, the church, the community hub of Hogan's Alley. And what we were talking about on this day was environmental justice and looking at a few different components of environmental justice. A lot of what we hear in urban forestry is around what would be called a distributional justice, and it's like planting trees where they're needed, you know, built environment, heat absorbing sidewalks, roads, buildings. We need to get trees to shade those surfaces and also provide the evaporation to cool the ambient air. But there are other pieces involved. Procedural being awareness of this history, awareness that a researcher advocated for this urban planning approach at one point from UBC, awareness that the city was a participant and actively being persuaded by speculators using this language of blight and slum. And it had an impact that targeted disproportionately a Black community and scattered them. And yeah, it was it's that procedural influence and recognizing those past patterns and how they can continue to show up. And through Hogan's Alley, this collaborative model has started to appear. Rather than a direct relationship with the city, you're starting to see a bit more influence of community groups, community advocates, and there's some awareness building now where Hogan's Alley has actually showed up in the Northeast Falls Creek plan. It's at least acknowledged at this point, but the next step is actually implementing some changes that begin to work towards repair for that community. So. And here's my colleague from City of Vancouver, and she had shared that within the operations group of City of Vancouver, there was no discussion about practices specifically within Hogan's Alley. No mention of Hogan's Alley and how they might approach planting practices in a fairly culturally sensitive situation. So that's an ongoing procedural injustice to be aware of. But when we look at maps and plans from above, we look at maps, we see, okay, this neighborhood is deficient on trees and tree canopy, so we need to target our efforts there. But it removes people and the impact that they felt in direct interactions with the city. And this was then, but there's still an ongoing situation where there's no direct contact with the community. Where we start to form these links between community groups and people within the community and the city is where relationships start to form, and you're a little bit more removed from the peaks and valleys of the election cycle, and you can start to work towards repair and see some real changes in the neighborhood. Looking at some of the maps that are commonly used in urban forestry, we have a few different resolutions. I'm getting technical here. It'll be fairly quick, but we hear a lot of talk about canopy cover. Chris mentioned canopy within Oak Bay and targets towards the future. That's kind of the common metric we're using in urban forestry right now. So we can also break it down to the neighborhood level. We can break it down to zoning areas that have been packaged up and understand change in both in a loss and a gain scenario over time. So if Oak Bay measures their urban forest in 2017 and again in 2021, we can measure, you know, what was there then and what is there now, and look at different areas to measure within that potentially. What we're not necessarily seeing is health indicators or the overall structural stability of trees or past pruning that may have introduced weaknesses. For that, we want an individual tree inventory, and we want people to go out and actually examine the trees and get more information, because that's going to have an operational impact, right? Whereas we're just looking at canopy from above, we're not picking up on the full picture necessarily. So this is kind of the dizzying network of urban forest monitoring products that are out there. And each municipality and the regional district are all doing their own thing. We're not really collaborating. Everybody's got their own little piece of information, different times, different methods, different contractors. And using data sets that are flown for other purposes in most cases. But here there's an opportunity. CRD is doing work across the whole of the CRD, but we're not breaking it down to the scale that the individual municipalities necessarily need. And previously till this year, the overall quality of their product wasn't up to the standards of local governments. But it's still a valuable tool because we're able to run comparisons from community to community, which we can't really do. I can't take Senech's product and use it against Victoria because they use two different methods, different resolution, different contractors. So that's all going on. We're doing this analysis to understand the canopy, but what does it ultimately amount to? It is an important piece, but just something to be aware of. So we're going to get academic here for a moment and bring up a paper from Camilo Ordonez, Urban Forest Governance and Decision Making, a systematic review. And this is from the perspective of municipal managers. This is a really good paper if you want to understand. And this is situated in Canada. It's like Canadian municipal managers and their perspectives of what is important for governance. And some of the excerpts I pulled out of this directly: public participation in urban forestry. I got to remember to speak into the microphone. And the importance of facilitating public consultation and citizen-led urban forestry initiatives is well established in the literature. And I can verify that. If you look around, the recommendations are over and over again. There needs to be more public participation, more collaboration, direct involvement in urban forestry stewardship. Specific mechanisms for public participation are not mentioned by municipal managers in any of the reviewed studies. So it ranked very low for municipal managers. So, and some municipal managers are warming up to it. I mean, Chris and the work that is happening here in Oak Bay with Stephen is a perfect example of that. It's more of a collaborative approach, more direct, and we have this really great tool now with Coolkit to act as the intermediary between the institution and the community. In fact, what many municipal managers frequently mention is public education. Specifically, the process of raising public awareness about the benefits of trees to reduce barriers for program implementation. I hear this a lot. It's like, we need to educate people. People need to be educated. My experience in this community is that there are a lot of experts, like retired foresters, ecologists, biologists. Like, there's an extreme amount of expertise out there just chomping at the bit, like, put us in the fight. We want to be a participant in this, and lots of peripheral skill sets that are needed for this community collaborative approach, to be able to, write letters, to apply for grants, to organize events, community events. All of that, like, it's a broad skill set. It is not just the urban forestry expertise specifically that is needed. In general, to successfully implement an urban forest agenda, municipal governments must successfully engage with the public. That is something we're still struggling with in many communities. Engagement is really important, and not just the courtesy of notification. Early and ongoing engagement, informing and involving makes a huge difference. I wanted to give you some hope. This is just examples of District of Saanich, where community involvement has a direct spark in creating a change, in creating a new structure that made a difference in getting the program to where it is today. 2010 Urban Forestry Strategy, the initial one for Saanich, community spark, got that ball rolling. 2024 community, the natural assets inventory that was done in 2024. See where we're going. The significant tree program started years ago, came via a community push. So there are limitations on what staff in a municipality can do. They pick up the phone and say, hey, I think we should have a significant tree inventory. It's really like, that's a difficult thing to do, and especially so in larger communities. It needs to come via the community. So that's work we need to do, and it involves us being aware of models. Look to other cities that are out there that are working through some of these difficult dilemmas. The challenges we're facing in Oak Bay, in Saanich, and Victoria are all over Canada, all over the US, and Western Europe, United Kingdom. Similar issues to what we're facing right now. And there are cities that are finding ways, little bits and pieces, but you need to keep your eyes open and see how they potentially fit within your community. So what I'm advocating for is more of a shared governance and empowered people. I'm excited about this idea of a regional advisory committee where it's multidisciplinary, but we're thinking at the regional level. That's kind of a bit of a weak spot for us right now, but that could be a really tremendous support for local governments across the CRD. Because we're not all City of Victoria and District of Saanich where you've got the bigger budgets, where you could benefit from some of the resource sharing. But I think it goes a long way for community trust, and it's a model for other regions, other local governments, if we can start to come together and work on these big challenges as a group, rather than 10 different municipalities working on the same issues in their own different approach. Having a bit more of that leadership level to support them to take their work further. Briefly, our mapping project. So this is a project we took on thanks to a generous donor through Garry Oak Meadow Preservation Society, where we wanted to contribute something to two municipalities, District of Saanich and City of Victoria, in bringing in a new product, like a new tool, a new layer of the mapping picture. So this is a unique view of the urban forest that hasn't yet been produced, and we're in the process of developing this tool with two capstone students in UBC's Master Geomatics and Environmental Management program. We are working with Terra Remote Sensing, a remote sensing contractor that's based in Sydney, and we acquired our own data, and we approached them and said, well, and speaking with my colleagues that work in remote sensing, I asked, like, if you could have your wish list and what you would want to put on a helicopter and like what resolution to fly to do this specific purpose. And we heard back from them and built our approach based on that. So we flew at a very high resolution of imagery and also included near infrared in addition to the normal 3 bands you would collect for aerial photos. And then the LiDAR, which is laser scanning, we shot at a very high point cloud density, so higher than most local governments would ever need to enable the tool that we want to develop, which is the ability to detect Garry Oak from within the wider urban forest. And that work's ongoing. I'm really excited to share that when they deliver, and we're hoping to open source the methods in effect and perform an accuracy assessment and offer these methods out to local governments to include in their future urban forest mapping. So we can see, because Garry Oak is quite significant to this region and is a critically endangered ecosystem, it actually matters to have that layer of analysis. We don't get that from present canopy data that local governments are capturing. So this is one of the early calls where they were showing they were just working through early classification of and cleaning the data that they had collected from both LiDAR and aerial imagery. This is the call we were on. This was before our capstone students had gotten started on it, but you can see all the pink is all the point cloud or LiDAR, and here you can see the combination of the LiDAR with the aerial imagery over top of it. And the pink is the near infrared, so the multispectral. And that's really helpful to get the reflectivity signature of specifically the Garry Oak leaf. And this is a canopy height model, which you would see City of Victoria has a product like this, but this is GOMPS fundraised LiDAR. And the scan angle that we use, you can see it almost looks like the LiDAR has been flown at the ground level, but because of the scan angle, they're able, and the incredibly high resolution we flew LiDAR at, or the point cloud rather, you're able to get these 3D models of effect that look, they give us a volumetric view of the trees. So we also acquired this data to provide to community partners because data access is kind of hard with local governments. So we want to offer the raw imagery to people that can use it and do their own forms of analysis that can't necessarily be activated by local governments. That's our contribution, where we want to kind of seed the possibilities data sets and offering them to other organizations that have capabilities to run this software-based analysis. So in closing, I just have a few things to share. This is a news story about the additional $858,000 that came for City of Victoria in 2018, thanks to Laurel Collins. Not thanks to Laurel Collins, thanks to community members that were influential in centering urban forestry as a benefit to the community. And that has made a huge difference to that program. It's resulted in several careers being formed and multiple more people out there maintaining these trees every day, including new trees that are planted, providing that early establishment care and pruning. Thomas Soulier, now here at Oak Bay, mentioned while he was still at City of Victoria, the overall long-term success of the urban forest depends on having interested, passionate, and well-informed residents. I agree. City of Tacoma, I love as an example for this collaborative model. They're just doing some amazing stuff through the Tacoma Tree Foundation. The Tacoma Tree Foundation is doing so much of the organizing work on the ground, connecting people that traditionally haven't had a great relationship with the city, and doing a lot of that hard work to open up new planting spaces, both on city property and on private property. And it has resulted in growth of the program in many unexpected ways, I would say. I love this goal in the City of Tacoma's, this is City of Tacoma's urban forest strategy, actually. Goal number 6, sustainable urban forest management and equity is achieved through a partnership with the city and its residents, resulting in improved well-being, human health outcomes, and stronger local economies. Mentioned specifically in the short term, building trust and strong partnerships between the city, partners, and community, revisiting public engagement methods to retain open lines of communication, including the community and decision-making process for urban forestry efforts, and seeking inclusive outlets for city members to actively steward. I don't see that language in almost any urban forest strategies. It's always like educate the community and maybe stewardship opportunities through invasive species pulling and that sort of thing. This is a little bit more hands-on and direct involvement right at the planning level and ongoing, not just during the urban forest strategy phase. This is an example we've taken on of community-based inventory. We do training with community members. We've done it through neighborhood associations in the district of Saanich. We give them about an hour of training on how to measure trees, show them some app-based tools for species identification, and kind of hold their hands through building an individual tree inventory. And we tackle a park. This is a partnership with District of Saanich, and we're starting to amass some park inventory. We can turn that over to Saanich where it can be offered to the public, but it can also be used for Saanich's operational needs because they don't presently have a tree inventory, and we can start to build it for them even just at this small scale. This is one of my favorite examples of a participatory urban forest project. The New York City Trees Count census happens every 10 years. The previous one, there were numerous studies that came from just this as a social tool. But presently they're up past 26,000 trees, over 1,000 volunteers participating, and 225 parks surveyed. And they're massively engaged in this. They're very excited and motivated. There's lots of teams and team leaders. There's a whole infrastructure around this. It's incredible. If you go look at some of the videos around the New York City tree census, you will be inspired, I promise you. Advocating for high quality and public accessible urban forest data. I can't say that enough. Like, transparency has seemed to suffer in the last little bit. Local governments are collecting more and more high quality information, including this LiDAR and urban forest canopy analysis, freeing it up to open data portals so people can investigate and build tools and unique layers that can actually support us in influencing future elected officials to make decisions that are going to situate the urban forest higher up the policy ladder. And advocating for ongoing data collection, talking to politicians and saying, like, we can do a better job at measuring our urban forest. We don't know what we don't know. We don't have an inventory. We don't have updated urban forest LiDAR. So that's really important if you're able to advocate for that. And that is my presentation. Thank you.